lineage. There's actually something, I don't know if you noticed, something really interesting happening in this psalm. Hebrew poems, and this is a Hebrew poem, all the psalms are Hebrew poems, they have a few ways of telling you what they're all about. One way a psalm can tell you what it's about is repetition. And you've probably picked up on this part. This is probably the most repetitive psalm in the whole book. So what's this psalm about? It's about God's faithful love. Well, yeah. This psalm actually has another way of telling us what it's about, because it begins and it ends with the same idea. And if you ever see that when a psalm is topped and tailed with the same word or concept, it's asking you to pay attention. So verse 1, give thanks to the Lord for he is good. Then verse 26, give thanks to the God of heaven. Psalm 136 is an invitation to thank God. Here's the interesting thing though. This psalm mentions all sorts of things that we could be thankful for, or all sorts of things that Israel could be thankful for. God has done all sorts of things that are worthy of our gratitude. We could thank him for his creation, for his salvation, for saving his people. But that line that we repeated, it's not about something God's done. The wind's making its contribution. The line isn't about what God's done. The line is about what kind of a God God is. Not give thanks to the Lord because he loves us. Oh, sorry. It is because he loves us. It's not because he made us or he saves us, right? It's not in his actions. It's give thanks to the Lord for his faithful love endures forever. Isn't that interesting? The psalm isn't about thanking God for what he's done, but for who he is. So why does it mention what he's done? Why does it bother talking about God making the world or saving his people from slavery in Egypt? Why does the author of the psalm, why does the psalmist, as we call him, why does the psalmist bother with God's actions if it's God's love that he's thankful for? That's what I'd like to dig in today. Why thank God? How do these pieces, thanks, God's character, God's actions, how do they fit together into the puzzle that is Psalm 136, this beautiful prayer? Why thank God? Will you take a look with me from verse 1? Give thanks to the Lord for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. I'll skip that line from here. Give thanks to the God of gods. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. I think it's pretty clear, right? This psalm, this prayer, it's about our thanks and it's about God's love. Not only his love, but his faithful love. Some translations translate this term God's loving kindness. If you've got the NIV translation, that just uses the word love, which is actually a bit of a shame because the word used in the Hebrew, in the original Hebrew, it's quite a big and powerful word. I actually usually prefer not to talk about the Greek and the Hebrew words because if I get it wrong, which I probably shouldn't say it, but some pastors do get it wrong, some preachers do. If I get it wrong, you'll have no way of knowing. There's no accountability. But I am going to talk about this word because it is so important for not just this psalm, not just the psalms in general, but it's really important for understanding the whole Hebrew Bible, the whole Old Testament. And the Hebrew word, which my translation renders faithful love, is chesed. Give thanks to the Lord because his chesed endures forever. And this word chesed is important because it does mean love, but it doesn't only mean love. And it does mean faithfulness, and it means kindness, and it means mercy, but it doesn't only mean faithfulness or kindness or mercy. This is a word that's difficult to capture in a single English word. It's difficult to translate into English because it sort of captures God's whole attitude and his disposition and his feelings for his people. His feelings for his people. Now, it's important to hear that properly. It's not his feelings and his attitude towards everyone. It's his mindset towards his people, his covenant people, the people that he's established a relationship with. My favorite translation of this word is covenant faithfulness. You see what a big and rich word it is. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his love and his kindness and his faithfulness and his loyalty and his devotion to his chosen people endures forever. And you can see why they don't translate it that way. So if we're to thank God for his covenant faithfulness, why does the psalmist go on about his creation? What do God's works have to do with his chesed? Verse 9. Verse 4, I should say. He alone does great wonders. He made the heavens skillfully. He spread the land on the waters. He made the great lights, the sun to rule by day, the moon and the stars to rule by night. Do you sort of get the impression that the psalmist has been reading Genesis 1? He's been reading the creation story, right? He's been reading about God making the world, making the heavens and the earth and separating water from water, creating the sun to rule the day, the moon and the stars to rule the night. And interspersed with this story for the psalmist is this line, his faithful love endures forever. A lot of the time nowadays when modern speakers talk about Genesis 1, we're not dealing with these sorts of ideas. Often we're dealing with the kinds of questions like, how does this story relate to history, right? Did God really make the world in 6 days, or are the days representative of something else? How does this actually match up with history? We've got to focus on history. I think it's instructive that when Genesis reads the Psalms, or other way around, when the Psalms read Genesis, they're not as interested in the history as they are in God himself. Yes, it's describing God as the historical creator. He made the heavens, he spread out the land, he made the sun and stars. But the point that the psalmist is drawing isn't, how did this happen? It's not, how long did this take? The point is, what does this tell us about God? I wonder if the psalmist had his Bible open while he was writing this psalm. If he had it open to Genesis 1 and he was reading it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw that the light was good. God's creation was good. And if God's creation was good, what does that say about the Creator? Do you see why this psalm links the creation to our thanksgiving? Why do we thank God? Because of his faithful love. How do we know that his love is faithful? Because he's given us a picture of his love right from the beginning of his creation. God could have made it dull or lifeless or meaningless, or he could have filled it with the evils that we're told came along later, or the evils that we experience today. But God made his creation good. As Christians, we understand that God is remaking his creation to be good. Why? Because of his faithful love. Where else do we see God's faithful love, God's chesed? If God created out of love, we wouldn't expect him to just make the world and then leave it be, would he? That's called deism. God created, then he abandoned. As Christians, we believe something totally different to that. Where else do we see God's unfailing love? Verse 10. He struck down the firstborn of the Egyptians and brought Israel out from among them with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. He divided the Red Sea and led Israel through, but hurled Pharaoh and his army into the Red Sea. Do you hear the story of the Exodus, if you know that story? Do you hear the story of the Exodus echoed in these words? In some ways, the way this is worded, the emphases that are placed here, it almost sounds like God is just being unfair to the Egyptians. But if you know the story, you know the context, you know that this is the story of God saving his people out of slavery. His people are enslaved in Egypt, and the psalmist is looking back at that. But he doesn't just save them out of slavery. Verse 16, he led his people in the wilderness. He struck down great kings and slaughtered famous kings, Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, and gave their land as an inheritance to Israel, his servant. So God had created the world good because of his love. And because he was motivated by love, when things went wrong, he didn't just leave it be. When his people were enslaved in a foreign land, he didn't just leave them there. Do you see why the psalmist is inviting us to thank God for his faithful love, but then telling us about his actions? God isn't a do as I say, not as I do kind of God. God knows that actions speak louder than words. So he doesn't just say, I love you, he does it. God rescued his people. And he didn't just rescue them out of slavery. He saved them to a better place. Now that all sounds well and good. If you're a bit of a cynic, if you're a bit of a pessimist, you might say, well, that's very nice. It's a lovely idea for God to watch over you. But it's not very realistic. Life isn't kind. Life isn't fair. Things don't work out that way. And I think to some extent the psalmist would agree with you. Life isn't kind. When God saves someone, that doesn't mean all the problems in the world go away. I think the psalmist knows this. The psalmist knows as he tells his story that it is a good story, but it's not a nice story. It's not easy reading. God is loving, but life isn't easy. How does the psalmist start to tell the story of the Exodus? Verse 10. God struck the firstborn of the Egyptians. When God frees the slaves, it's not like he just teleports them out of there. It's not magic. It takes time. There's human effort involved, and it takes hardship and bloodshed and suffering. The psalm mentions the death of the firstborn children. If you know the story, you know that the Egyptians killed many Israelite children as well. The psalm leaves these things out. It's really focused on how did God save his people out of Egypt. Emancipation from slavery isn't neat and tidy, and the Bible doesn't pretend it is. So the point of God's faithful love isn't that the up close, the day-to-day lives of God's people are nice and pleasant and problem-free. God isn't writing a one-liner. He's not writing a limerick. He's writing an epic poem, right? And if you zoom into a particular verse or stanza or a particular line, you're not necessarily going to get a really clear picture of God's faithful love. When you zoom out and you see the story as a whole, what do you see? God is the God who is faithful because he sets his people free. And that's why we thank him. Now, does that mean we have to go back over 3,000 years to see God's love in action? It would seem a bit weird, wouldn't it? If God's love lasts forever, we should be able to find some more recent evidence of it, shouldn't we? God's everlasting love didn't run out at the Exodus. Verse 23, God remembered us in our humiliation and rescued us from our foes. He gives food to every creature. Notice he gives food, not he gave food to every creature. Give thanks to the God of heaven. His faithful love endures forever. You see how it's shifting from the past to the present. God's love is past, it's present, and it's forever. Verse 23 says, He remembered us in our humiliation and rescued us from our foes. Now that could just be a summary form of the Exodus story that we've just been told. It could just be we're capturing that, we're encapsulating it in a sentence. Bible scholars tend to say it's more likely that the psalmist has in mind a much more recent salvation, something closer to home, something that reflects the story of the Exodus in the modern day. We don't just see God's faithfulness in the distant past, we see it reflected in the present. I think it's appropriate as we welcome in Pastor Terry and Sue, and as we say goodbye to Rick and his family, I think it's appropriate that we just consider a few ways in which God has been faithful to us, in which we've seen God's faithfulness as a church over the last few years. It's a good time to take stock and just consider God's faithfulness. So I'd like to highlight just 3 ways that God has been faithful to Ellenbrook during this time. This is nothing monumental. It's not in the same league as emancipation from slavery. It's just 3 little ways. Number 1, God was faithful during COVID. When the pandemic hit, when we were put under social restrictions and felt more isolated, I think those of us who were in the state at the time, we can see how God was kind to us. But as a church, God was kind to us when he gave us a pastor during that time. In fact, God gave us a pastor the day before our church services went online. I've gone through the timeline, and it's really interesting to match up the timeline of the pastoral search against the development of COVID. It's a remarkable thing to see what God did. And not only that, just as we suddenly had to rely on our volunteers' technical skills, God brought together a team of technically capable volunteers. It was as if it was just for this moment. As I remember it personally, we had, as a church, a real sense of togetherness throughout an isolated time. So there's number 1. Number 2, God was faithful when we had to look for a new church office. If you were there at the time, you might remember our lease on our ministry centre was running out. It was about to get way more expensive, way outside our price range. The local commercial market was pretty dry. It was pretty rough. It's not quite as rough as it is now. But it was a real struggle to find anything suitable. And it was a real blessing to finally find a really perfect property in the heart of the community. Just a short walk in that direction to be the home of our ministry as a church. And there's number 2. Number 3, God has been faithful during this last 12 months as we've searched for a new pastor. And this comes particularly in a time when a lot of pastors are leaving the ministry. Pastors are leaving ministry faster than they're signing up. And so it can be a real struggle to find pastors. It's a huge show of God's kindness that without an interim period, and we'll thank Rick for that a little bit, but it's a show of God's kindness that without that interim period, without any time with no pastor, God has given us, He's given us not only a pastor, but an experienced pastor to lead us, Lord willing, for the next few years. So these are 3 pretty small, at the end of the day, signs of God's faithfulness. They're little things, but they point to something bigger, I think. Because God blessed us as we went through the isolation and the struggles of COVID. But we know that God is rescuing us from a much deadlier disease, the disease of sin, which threatens not just our lives, but our souls. And God has blessed us with a new ministry centre, a new office. But we know that what God has in store is not just a new office, but a new heaven and a new earth, a new Jerusalem, where we will live with God and He will be our God and we'll be His people. We'll live with God. And God has given us a new pastor for the next few years, but we know we have a shepherd, a pastor. That's what pastor means, is shepherd. We have a good shepherd who died for our sins so we could live with Him forever. And that good shepherd is Jesus. It's a wonderful thing to be a sheep in Jesus' flock. How wonderful it is to know that He didn't just love us, but He loves us, and He will love us forever if our lives are His. Give your life to Jesus and learn what it means to give thanks to the Lord, for He is good, whose faithful love endures forever. Let's pray. Lord, our King, we praise your glorious and almighty name. How incredible is your power. How awe-inspiring are your works. We praise you for who you are and for what you've done for us. Thank you for the incarnation, the word in flesh, Emmanuel, God with us. Thank you for your self-sacrificial, servant-like love. We long for the day when all your sinners made saints will glorify you in the holy temple of the New Jerusalem, when all the tribes of the Lord are gathered to give thanks to the name of the Lord, and there will be peace within the city's walls for all eternity. Amen.